Hello, and everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Hourlings podcast. I'm Jeffrey, here to host a great concept with how to name your characters. Of course, I have an alliteration with my name, Jeffrey Jacobs, but maybe you want to do something different. So I'm going to hand this off to Shay to announce the great 5 top ways to name your characters. Shay, take it away.
All right, I'll do my best. I think I'll start by saying that a lot of authors, at least new authors that I know, will just hit a stop sign when it comes to naming characters. If they can't think of a perfect name, they will stop writing and they will dig around and try to find the perfect one. And I think all of us would agree here that's not the way to do it. If you have to name them Bob for the entire manuscript before you go back and change it, name them Bob and you'll figure it out. The name will come to you later. Better to write than to get stuck trying to find the perfect name. But if you are stuck, that's why we're here.
Having said that, I like having a name that I can sink my teeth into and go, yeah, this is the name.
Sometimes they come like that. And I think that's the same way with a book title. Sometimes the book title will come first, or, you know, the name will come first of the character, and then you design the character. But that's a fortunate little talent you have there, David. I'm not always like that. Sometimes I get fortunate to have that happen. But I'm sure our listeners have felt the pain of not being inspired. So we're going to inspire you today. We're going to give you 5 ways to name your character. And we're going to count down from the, I don't know, the least popular, I don't know. We don't know why we ordered it this way. It just is what it is.
We ordered them this way because that's the way Shay ordered them on her list.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So we trust Shay.
Arbitrary, just deal with it.
Very good. Very good. All right. So coming in at number 5, honoring someone you know. So this could be, or killing someone you know. Yes, exactly. Depending on how you feel about that person. There's a lot of interesting names in real life, and I think we all know people that have like just a very musical or a standout name that we think, wow, that would be great to name a character after that. So use inspiration from your friends and family and maybe even heroes that you've never met to honor them. It's a great way to honor someone. If you're not going to dedicate the book to them, which is like a little much, it's a good like second step, honoring them. Well, go ahead, David.
So 2 points. One is it's a good way to get sued, especially if you use the character's name
Oh, don't use last names, just first names.
You use it in a negative fashion. Yeah. Second, if you do use somebody's name, it's best to use it with permission. And if you do, that is actually known as a Tuckerization, after the science fiction writer Wilson Tucker, who used to do that. It's also a great way to, you can run a contest with your fans to see who wants to die in your next novel or who wants to be a featured sub-character in your next novel. So there's a lot of things that you can do with something like that.
That's a great point, David. You can generate some engagement with your audience by auctioning off, in a sense, the chance to be named in a book. I like that. Jeffrey, what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, I will say that although, David, you are right, I got to be very careful what I say here. The character that I have, Professor Rebecca Priestley, she has the name Rebecca, but not the same Rebecca that I did know and liked a bit too much in high school. Same name, but that's all I took from her. And it's not about her. She's not a character in my book. It's just I liked the name. And that's how she got the name Rebecca.
Well, I don't think that counts as, defaming somebody.
No, I don't think so either.
Nobody in the Hourlings is encouraging anyone to get arrested.
No.
We'll note that since Marty's not here, everybody knows that I did kill him off in one of my stories.
with his full support, his full blessing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe take the first name or the last name of someone. Maybe don't take their actual, first and last name if you're going to do that.
And I will say another one that I used is Lothar. In the first story I had published, The Unstoppable Annihilation, main character, well, one of the main characters was this little boy named Lothar. And I called him Lothar just because I really like the Lothar, the Collatz conjecture, which is the whole 3n plus 1 mathematical problem where you have this algorithm. I'm not going to go into detail. This is algorithm that always goes to 1, no matter what number you choose. And the point is, It's named after that guy, Lothar. And I wanted to honor him because he was just a cool mathematician. And that's why he's Lothar.
Nice. All right, moving on to number 4. This one's a little bit more analog. I'm not going to use any digital resources here. Number 4 is a baby naming book. I have one on my shelf over here. I'm sure my parents gave me very weird and concerned looks when I walked home with it. But being an author, you just get those looks. You acquire very strange books and Google very strange things.
Yeah. Never look at an author's search history in
yes,
their web
exactly.
browser.
So I use this baby naming. I'm sorry, David. I use this baby naming book. It's alphabetical. It's also organized by culture, so it has French names and stuff like that. And so yeah, I use it when I just want to get some ideas, and I write down my favorites. And I don't use them all right away. Sometimes I just write down ones I like that I'll come back to if I'm struggling. Go ahead, David. Sorry to.
I have used a baby naming book for naming puppies, but never for characters.
Yeah.
I'm just not generally an analog guy. There's there are name generators online.
I will say that one of the characters that there's going to be a second novel. If you love Chronosphere, don't worry, there's another one coming. But let me write the first one, so don't pester me on that fact. But one of the characters, in fact, the main character from the second novel, her name is Mbose. And Mbose I picked from a list of Mandinkan names that are used in Africa, more or less modern names, but since she's a character from the 14th century, I have to sort of speculate on what those names might be. But Mbose was as good a name as any, and I said I want something that's kind of Emish and has an apostrophe in it. And Bob's your uncle. I got Mbose.
Apostrophe. That's very unusual.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Not in some languages.
No.
For a name?
Yeah, for a name.
That's cool.
Well, O'Connell and O'Connor and.
Oh, for a last name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. So baby naming books, some people just like to. If you're like me, where when I was looking for an agent, I got the hard copy book of Writer's Market and highlighted. Man, I used a highlighter. Can you imagine?
Oh yeah.
People prefer that. It's a fun way to do a little research, and you can do it when you're not in an urgent need of a character. You can start making a list to be your repertoire that you can pull from.
Well, that is something too. When I come across interesting names, I tend to write them down in a notebook and go,
exactly.
I don't know that I need a Raven Jones right now, but Raven Jones sounds like a counter-type person.
Yeah.
In a futuristic society. I like that name. I might use it sometime.
And I will say, one other issue that when you start coming up with these names, you might find that I know some authors that have a bunch of G names in their book. Oh well, they just mistakenly put too many G names, or you have too many J names or something like that. The great thing about the baby book is that you can just say, well, I just need a name that does not start with the letter J because I've got too many of them. I'm going to choose M or F or P or something like that.
That's a general principle right there anyway.
Yeah.
When you're creating a book, you'd like to have some character names that are sufficiently different from each other that people don't get confused. So having Bob, Bill, Richard, and Richie all in the same story might be a bad idea.
Nope.
It might be, but I would be the devil's advocate and say that if you're going for hyper-realism, it's very common. I know 10 different Katies in my life. You know what I mean? So it's actually not so unusual that there would be 2 characters named Katie. Maybe one's more prominent and one is very secondary. I did that in This Is Not a Love Scene, where I had one character named Jake and one character named Jake 2.0.
Well, that's clever.
You made a joke out of that and made it part of the characterization. I would say in general that when we're writing, we want to be real, but not too real, and we want clarity rather than confusion.
Yeah, in my life, I know a lot of Jeffs that like electric cars. It's just, I don't know why. It's just a lot of the people I know that Jeff, they like electric cars. And I know a lot of Heathers that like Doctor Who. I don't know
it
why.
could be because you run an electric car group.
Well, yeah, but most of the Jeffs I know like electric cars.
Well,
and most of the Heathers I know like Doctor Who.
Car group. If you ran a horse riding group, it might be finding Jeffs that like horses.
Well, Yeah, but you do realize that I'm not talking about cosplay. In cosplay, I don't know that many Jeffs, or in Doctor Who, I don't know that many Jeffs. So I'm just saying, for some reason.
Certainly don't confuse the reader, but I think that there's a happy medium between what I'm saying and what David is saying. I think that you would never have two Blakes being very prominent and always talking to each other and always in the same room together. But if you're going to have,
if I was to write a story about Doctor Who fans, I would not have more than one Heather. It would just get confusing, although there is the Heathers.
But you could say, you know, my second grade teacher who was also named Heather, you know, or if the character is not really very present and it's just mentioned, I think that adds an interesting level of realism while also keeping a safe distance of clarity.
Unless you're going for
it's irony. It's a very minor point. There's many other ways to do realism other than that, but I'm just saying it's like, you know, a very subtle detail you can weave into your work.
You can always go for irony, like Ed, and Eddie, or Two Brothers Daryl.
Yeah.
You know, you can always play it out.
There's one author that I read, Gordon Dixon. His big thing was almost all of his main characters in his novels had a one-syllable name, Hal or Bob or Doug, stuff like that. Almost all of the main characters for almost all of his books, because he wanted his main character to have a simple, easily remembered, unmistakable name. Now, I personally think that's maybe taking it a bit too far, but but you
especially for one syllable.
Good writer.
Yeah.
I'm going to save some room at the end of this list to go over some cautions about naming. I think that'd be a good one to come back to. But I have some thoughts on that too.
Yeah.
But let's go on to number 3, which darn you, David, you already mentioned. It's kind of the opposite of the analog option, which is a name generator. Now, name generators are things where you can just type in Google or DuckDuckGo and say, you know, sci-fi name generator, and they'll give you names with the flavor of science fiction, or fantasy name generator, or whatever. It's a great way to get. What's that?
FantasyNameGenerator.com.
Yeah, it's a great way to get.
Link in the sidebar there.
It's a great way to get
names. Orc names, elf names.
Yeah, different races.
Fiction names, Lord of the Rings names, you name it. They have plus real names, real nationality type names, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a random generator. So you pick your category and then you just keep clicking until you start seeing names that you like.
Which can be kind of fun. And it's a great way to be exposed to a lot of names. But I would say that there are 2 caveats with this one. Number 1 is that any author can use it and does use it. So, you know, it might not be the most original name that you use.
It's so big that I mean, there's so many names. You're in pretty decent shape, but then I don't necessarily always take the names exactly as they are. So, you know, I have an orc named Haguk in one of my stories.
Oh, yeah, I love Haguk.
I started off with a fantasy name generator, but I liked part of the name and I liked the ending of another name, and so I combined them.
And I think that's a better way, in my opinion, if you're going to use a name generator. Just even if it is a very, very large pool, I don't know how their algorithm works. It could show, you know, the same ones more commonly than others. So just, you know, I like to go for originality. My other caveat is that, speaking of originality, those name generators will follow very traditional stereotypes of what an elf name sounds like, or what an orc name sounds like. So if you want to model your culture, if orcs in your culture are not going to be stereotypical, which, David, I'm sorry, I don't mean to say like stereotypical is a bad thing, because you know it's a audiences have responded well to that type of culturing of orcs. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm saying if you're going to be,
I got the opposite response, which was, wow, that really does sound like an orc name. And I'm like,
I don't
have a name generator because I would not have come up with that on my own.
Yeah, and so it does have that ring of, wow, that really sounds like an orc or an elf name. But again, if you're going to try to break some molds, that might not be the best option for you. But it's there, and I think most people know it's there. You may not be shocked that was our number 3.
Yeah,
but that's our number 3.
I do have one more point on that. Is if you use those fantasy name generators, don't think you're getting something unique. It's sort of like getting your cover from Fiverr. You get your cover from Fiverr, somebody's probably already using that cover. If you get your name from name generators, someone's probably already using that name. Unless you do something clever like David did.
Like David said, it depends on how large the library is. There are some name generators I know that, like, when I click through them, they do repeat And then there's other ones that really don't because they're just so large. So try to find a really large one if you're going to do that.
Your mileage maker
is pretty good.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So number 2 is a little more complex. For number 2, we have researching foreign language roots for your names. So one example I'll give is like, in Harry Potter, the character that can transform into a dog is named Sirius, which means dog, I think in Latin, right? It's a name of a dog star. I know. But yeah, so like something like that where it has like a meaning in a foreign language and applies to your character somehow, their traits or their abilities, that can be interesting. Or just be inspired by the many interesting phonetic stuff going on in other languages. So yeah.
For instance, you can take sayuri. Sayuri is a lily flower, and yet it's also a common Japanese woman's name. Or you can take, Lily. I mean, it's a common English name.
Right.
I mean, you can literally take all these languages where, like, if there's patterns for flowers or trees or something else, take that word in that language and just bring it over. Another thing that's fun is knowing some languages have rules, like Italian. Italian has the A for feminine and the O for masculine.
Talk about later.
Sorry?
Something we're going to talk about later.
Oh yes, well, more cautions, but yeah, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that those languages that you have general rules, and the A and O, or I for masculine, plural, and E
for me, I think that this is also, when we say foreign language roots, we're not necessarily meaning like name your character Vladimir, which is a very obviously Russian name, Slavic name. For me, I feel like it's more like using I don't want to say a dead language, but an antiquated language that's not in use so much, so that you don't have these very, very heavy global flavors to them that really pigeonhole your character. Like if you name your character Vladimir in your book, he better be from some kind of Slavic inspired culture, in my opinion. But using something like a Latin root or a Gaelic root that's not quite in use that much. Just even just like the root word or just the noun, and then changing that noun a little bit to make it into a name or something like that.
Although I will say there are certain rules that you use for the Slavic names, like Vladimir is Vladi.
Right. So like using Emir. In one of my fantasy novels, I had a Casimir. I know it was Cazimir, but the actual Slavic name would be Casimir. But just play, you can play around and change them a little bit. Just being inspired by, you mentioned apostrophes earlier, right, Jeffrey? Like using stuff like that.
Guttural stop. Yeah.
But you can also use some historical names.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Although it turns out things like Bill is actually a long-term historical English name, so you'd be perfectly fine having a Bill in Pride and Prejudice. But you can still, despite that, you can use some historical names. You can also delve into mythology. So if you have a character named Nurgle, you might change the spelling or something. But Nurgle was like the Mesopotamian god of war and pestilence. So you could have a meaning for your villain, and only a certain select few people are actually going to get the basis for it. So when you're delving into foreign, you can also delve into some foreign mythologies as well for some interesting names. I think Thor and Loki are too familiar, but I'm pretty sure the average person doesn't know Nurgle.
Right.
For that matter, they probably don't know much about Vishnu, and if they don't know much about Kali or Ganesha, except for some of our listeners who do know gods from the Hindu culture.
Very cool. All right, so that brings us number 1. Are you ready for a drum roll? All right, the number 1 tip on how to name your character, if you're stuck, is to start with the nickname. So we chose this as number 1 because, names have traditions. They can be common, especially if you're writing something not strictly fantasy or strictly science fiction, something a little more soft sci-fi or soft fantasy, you're going to come across pretty traditional names. The example I gave is like Daniel Shepard. That's one of my characters. But I was never really excited by the name Daniel Shepard. It's very common. But I was excited by his nickname, Shep. And so if you're really struggling with coming up with a name because you want something that's so unique and so catchy and so memorable, it's okay to have like a common and unmemorable actual name for your character and have a more unique nickname for your character. And in a sci-fi that I wrote, I had that situation where all the characters pretty much had common names, but because they were all members of a first responder type squadron, they all had very catchy monosyllabic nicknames. You know, like one character's nickname was Jig, the other one was Unk, the other one was, you know, whatever, it goes on and on. And those, of course, were just super interesting and super stand out, even though that wasn't their real name. So think about nicknames. Think about names that lend themselves well to nicknames. Going back to, I was talking about Casimir. I chose the name Casimir because I liked his nickname being Kaz. So, or at least a name that people who know him and love him would call him. You know,
I have a friend whose name is Kazmirchek.
Oh, cool! I like that. That's neat.
We just call him Kaz.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So I like names that lend themselves to nicknames. It gives you a lot of room to work with relationships in your books. Showing readers who's close to that character and who isn't.
The other thing is that it leads to disambiguation. I mean, if your character's name is Andrew, he can be Andy or Drew. If his name is Alexander, he can be Alex or he can be Xander. Many names actually split different ways that can differentiate.
Yeah.
I have a character in one of my stories that's named Jacob Johnson. Everybody just calls him JJ.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. I approve of JJ.
Me, I answer to the Iceman. Not really. But I will tell you a story that there's about 5 of us at work named Dave. So it got to the point where we actually came up with nicknames for ourselves. So I'm Notorious Dave, otherwise known as just Notorious. We have Infamous Dave. We have Dastardly Dave.
So they're all negative.
Yeah.
I like it.
I see it a different way.
I think Notorious Dave is awesome.
Well, I think that nicknames are, I mean, even in like real life, even if not like a writing point of view, nicknames, I love my nicknames I've been given in my life because I know that they've been given by people that love me. They're more intimate. In some ways, you can kind of choose your nickname, not always. I know some people put nicknames, onto you, but you can still embrace it or reject it. So there's something very self-affirming about a nickname, and I think that you can play with that with your character too. Let them have that self-affirming nickname that becomes part of their identity when they have a more common professional name that's on their birth certificate.
Right.
I think there's also nicknames, and then there's also, if you write military sci-fi, there could be
call names,
call signs.
Yeah.
Who doesn't know who I mean when I say Maverick? Or 007.
Yes.
Right.
Or Goose.
Yeah. Well,
or Iceman for that matter.
Yeah. No, I mean that's it exactly.
Yeah.
Plus, if you have a character in a thriller whose call sign is Headhunter, you're like, ooh, which probably sounds like somebody you don't want to mess with.
And at the very least, this is number 1 because it'll help you get excited about your character's name. It gives you more freedom to do something a little sillier or a little more out of the box, without having to make it explain why their name is that. Nicknames can be anything. There's so much freedom there, so it helps you get excited about naming your character.
Yep. And one other thing I will mention is that nicknames, you as the author give the nickname, but in the book, it is the best friends of the character that give the nickname.
Right.
Character themselves never give themselves a nickname, just in real life. You do not give yourself your nickname. You're told what your nickname is.
Yeah. Sure.
When I was in high school, we had a 3rd string guy that went on court in a basketball game, and he scored a basket almost immediately because he ran the wrong way and scored a basket on the wrong basket. His nickname forevermore was Wrong Way.
All right, so we hope that those 5 tips have gotten you excited and given you some ideas about naming a character. Now we're going to talk about, just briefly, a few cautions we have as you go about naming your character. And I think I'll let David describe the first caution, which is about following rules.
Okay. So let's say you have a fantasy story. You have not just one character, but you have a bunch of different characters. And let's say they're supposed to be different ethnicities. And the ethnicities in your world are different than, let's say, the nationalities in our world. So you can't just use French names and English names. So you may want to come up with your own kind of simplistic linguistic rules, perhaps different extensions for female names versus male names. Different patterns of characters that might be used for male names or female names for, say, one nationality as opposed to another nationality. So that when you hear a name in the story, you go, oh, that's from this nationality over here. And this over here is a warrior name for the culture that's trying to invade that nation, right? So some simple linguistic rules to help you differentiate the names of the different nationalities or ethnicities in your story could be pretty beneficial if you're coming up with more than just one name.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said with Italian, that can go with anything. I mean, maybe it is that all males end with the letter T and all women end with the letter Q. I don't know.
That's a great caution. I think it goes with just the world building rule of consistency. Just keep consistency. You can have so much freedom into what those rules are, or what those language rules are, but keep to them.
And I'll give you an example. Think Star Trek. Okay, if I say Kang, what race is he in Star Trek?
Oh yeah,
I'm pretty sure you probably said Klingon.
Right.
That's a pretty simple rule. Klingon names begin with K.
It's a simple rule, and it's also a great reinforcer of your road building. So make sure that you're utilizing that and paying attention to it. Another caution that I would throw out there, which is just changing the topic a little bit, is to not become too gimmicky with your names. Jacob, Jeffrey, called you Jacob. Jeffrey, you were talking about alliterations. I think that's fine, but there is a certain author I'm thinking of that exclusively does alliterations for all the characters' names. First and last name are always the same letter. And for me, it's just silly. It just seems a little immature.
Oh, I agree.
I don't really like it. I know the character, and I know the author is doing it to try to be, whimsical or just like a stylistic thing. But at the same time, there's like a lot of like killings and murder going on in her book. And I'm like, okay, like this isn't a children's book, obviously. If it's a children's book, that's one thing, but so avoid gimmicks. That's my preference. Maybe you guys, I don't think that's across the board, but Jeffrey agrees with me.
Yeah, because I will agree with you because there are too many Jeffrey Jacobses. I mean, come on, I have to.
I like your name. Your name has a great ring to it. Yeah, I'm saying have one Jeffrey Jacobs in your book.
No, but I'm saying, there's already, I have to put the C in the middle because that guy, Jeffrey Jacobs in Utah, that sells all those books about Mormonism. I mean, come on. I got to be Jeffrey C. Jacobs because of this guy. It's too common.
You have a great name, and it's fine to have a Jeffrey Jacobs in your book. I just wouldn't have a Jeffrey Jacobs and a David Dougson or whatever.
Right.
I would just avoid gimmicks with that.
Yeah, and I
or you can lean into it and use it as sort of a running joke. So, for instance, my parents, two characters like you just mentioned are introduced to each other, and the one says, "I guess your parents weren't very original," and the other character says, "Yep, neither were yours." Yeah,
I like it. If you
got named after my grandfather, I got named after my great grandfather.
Like with everything, if you call it out in your own book, then you got it, right? But if you don't call it out and you just kind of let it sit as like part of your style, I'm just not into it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll be honest. I know my parents liked the alliteration. That's why I'm Jeffrey Jacobs. They thought,
yeah.
alliteration.
Oh my gosh, I cannot stress enough that I'm not bashing names with alliteration. I'm bashing.
Of course not. No, just don't overuse it. It's okay once in a while, but don't overuse it.
Well, if you do it for a character, it's sort of like, well, this is the A character, and that's the B character, and that's the C character, and that's the J character, and that's kind of, if it's a pattern like that that jars, then again, you want the reader to kind of say, oh, these names sound kind of realistic in this context. You don't want them to go, oh, not another one.
Just remember that there's like a line between like children's literature, which is always going to be like cutesy with names, like, you know, if there's a baker, he's going to be called Mr. Doe, you know, and that's fine because it's a children's book. But there's like a line that you can't.
He's probably Chinese.
We hope that there's not racial insensitivity.
No, but I mean that Doe is a very common Chinese name.
Oh, okay, yeah, but there's a line where it's like after children's literature, it's just not cute anymore. When you do it in your novel, that is not meant to appeal, you know, exclusively to kids. So anyway, that I was too long on my soapbox. But any other cautions?
To our ethnic names, languages. Just be mindful of names that are common in, say, French or German or Italian. Don't overuse it. And make sure that if you're taking that German name, that your character is bona fide German or just has a good reason for being named Hans.
Yeah, I would say that's a good caution to make sure you're being sensitive to other cultures when you borrow.
I mean, I'll be honest, Lothar, the character I just mentioned, when I sent that to the editor for that publication, the editor said, why'd you call him Lothar? And I'm not going to explain, you know, blah, 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 what I just explained to y'all. I just said, okay, let me just make up a fake, you know, god in their society that is called Lothar. He's a healer, and voila. Now I've just got this backstory for the name that I fit into the book to give it a little panache.
Very cool. Any other cautions that we should talk about?
Well, the only thing I'll say is a lot of books are organized in a series now. So if you're going to live with a character's name for a bunch of books, pick something that excites you. Pick something that the reader will remember. I mean, James Bond clearly works, but so does Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
And
so
I'm always
Everdeen.
Yeah. Jeffrey, any last comments?
No, I just say I'm just on that topic. I'm very fond of the name Kevin, so I don't care that he's French. His name is Kevin.
Very cool. And my last caution is to not choose unpronounceable names or names that are like way too long and frustrating in your fantasy or sci-fi books because you want to be exotic and otherworldly. I get that, but it's very frustrating.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Make a name pronounceable. If it's not pronounceable, no. Both say though.
I mean, I have sometimes done, you know, this character whose name is unpronounceable in his own language. We just call him whatever, you know.
I was going to say that. You know, and my name is, you know, long string of characters. Right. Where he looks at the alien, and then he says, "Yes, but you can just call me Bob."
Yes, exactly. Bob. I like that.
I mean, I do have an alien. His name is. That's his name.
Yes.
You know.
Exactly. All right. So those are great cautions, and those are 5 great tips for naming your characters. We hope that you christen them joyfully moving forward. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Shay, for hosting another finely structured meeting. Until next time, see you guys and keep writing.